Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video number 346. Getting up there in Occult videos too, not just Occult Lit. I wanted to talk about the opportunistic reinterpretation of religious dogma by mainline religions, and also a few outlier groups that buck this trend. So religion evolves, this is understood within anthropology, the same way as culture, which evolves the same way as linguistics, technology, and of course genetics. Genetic evolution is the slowest. Even when you're doing artificial selection and you're breeding plants or animals or something, that's a lot slower as a form of change than changes that are linguistic in nature, with regards to communication. Or technology, of course, in the last 50 years, most evolution that's affected humans has been technological, specifically in computing and things. Before that, mechanical, from the Industrial Revolution. Well, when we look at religion, religions that do not adapt to a changing socio-political climate will tend to suffer. They will shrink or go the way of the dinosaur. They become extinct. Those that change tend to do better. There are some times that this doesn't happen. If it's like let's say a remote tribe, the Yanomami or something, an uncontacted group on some desert island. Those groups aren't experiencing that sort of change. They're effectively frozen in time. They don't have that going on. And also rebel groups or tribalistic groups at this point resisting globalism, the Yezidi or something. Groups that are outsiders even within a civic structure have no problem with that. This is why the early Christians, while there was a lot of doctrinal disagreement, debate, and discourse, they were a persecuted group and so actually were more puristic until the time in which the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, at which point things inverted. They became the persecutors, of course, and you have the establishment of a state religion which then evolves for political reasons. In a changing political climate, you will have that change. This explains what we see, for instance, with the Vatican. The current Catholic Pope ignores centuries of established Catholic dogma, has his own partially Marxist views, actually, and deviates completely from what you would consider canonical church opinion and or actual Christian scriptures. But this is natural. As you move towards a globalized world, globalized religion will happen. I see this as negative. I see it as the watering down of tradition. I don't even have to be a Catholic to understand that. You see the same thing within Islam. The Islamic movements that are engaged in oil sales, mosque building, etc., putting up minarets everywhere, those groups are practicing an inauthentic variant of Islam that is not doctrinal. But they're the most successful at promulgating their doctrine. Why? Doesn't matter if it's true or canonical or has tradition. It matters that it's capable of co-opting the functions of a state. It's sort of parasitical when you think about it. You see this within other groups. Another way in which groups promote themselves is just breeding. So you will have outliers like the Amish. They're very traditionalistic. They hold to a core set of principles that vary very little over time, but they breed heavily. So if they get some emigration from their religion, they have their, I can't remember what it's called, in some Amish circles, they let their teenage kids go off to like college and shit, and so they go and party and see what the outside world is like, and a lot of them come back to Amishdom, mainly because they've been psychologically trained to think one way and the world is thinking another way. But if a couple of people out of a family of 17 kids decide to emigrate, well, you still have a net gain of 15. And so that is one aside. But those groups have to play at least somewhat nice with the state, because otherwise they will be persecuted. Like if the Amish were to suddenly say, well, fuck the United States, we're not paying taxes anymore or something. Well, then the IRS would get involved. Their group would begin to suffer. And of course, as a rebel movement, you tend to get that kind of persecution as well. We see this among persecuted religious minorities throughout the world. But even when the dogma is not changed, as nobody's rewriting the Bible, Book of Mormon style or something, you will get an adaptation of what parts are considered important. So when you went to church, for those of you who are Christian or were Christian or whatever, you probably didn't read about the Song of Solomon. Well, it's just as important as every other part of the Bible. You would think on the surface it's supposedly religiously inspired. God effectively helped write it. But you don't hear about it. You don't hear about 1 Timothy 2:12 in a modern church setting, typically. You'll probably hear about it in a more traditional church, though. In fact, it might be a main facet of the preaching. When U.S. Christians had to adapt to gay marriage, you saw the same thing happening. Certain churches said, well, no, it's actually canonical and it's fine. The sodomy passage there refers to, basically just like aberrant sexuality. But this isn't aberrant, this is love under God. They reinterpreted a doctrine, or a dogma rather, by focusing on different aspects of Christianity that seemingly negate the ones that had been held up as more important before. We see this within multiple religions. So you'd have an expansionist version of Islam that preaches a literal jihad, and of course uses this to grind down foes, to extract manpower, and to promulgate its own size, its own scope. Other groups don't practice this. And of course you get a liberalization of these religions as they tend to move closer to the core of the world economically, Western Europe or Japan or something, but it is there. It takes more time for that to happen, by the way, than the adaptation of the religion in many cases. So therefore, what I would say is that other than countercultural spirituality, which is sometimes nothing more than an inversion of established religiosity, like with Satanism, it's an inversion of Catholicism with some edgelord politics, effectively, Ayn Rand objectivism intertwined with it, Stirnerism and stuff. A little bit of Nietzsche, a little bit of Ayn Rand, mix it together and put on a black robe and a pentagram, and there you have Anton LaVey, effectively. With regards to most mainline forces, they adapt over time. This is why the traditionalists, they often have schisms. This is what cripples larger religions. It gets too large and you have too many different disagreements over doctrine, you end up getting splits within your group. This has happened 1,000 times within the Protestant movement. It happens relatively less in some movements than others, prefaced on the political atmosphere at the time. That's about all. Peace out.